Hui mai nei, morena, and good morning and welcome to your wonderful Finance and Performance Committee meeting. I will start with apologies, and I have apologies received from Councillor Fletcher for absence and Councillor Sayers from lateness. Councillor Darby and Bartley also for lateness on council business as they're at the Planning Committee pre-agenda run through. Any other apologies? Just received a text from Councillor Hills for lateness. We have no attendance by electronic link. Declarations of interest.
Chair, in relation to the accommodation provider targeted rate discussion, I don't have a conflict of interest to declare and I will be participating. I haven't provided any affidavit as a brief of evidence for an appeal, so I'm very comfortable to participate in that vote.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just go back to the apologies and move ththose apologies. Thank you, Councillor Cooper, for seconding. All those in favour say aye. Right. Departure from Member Taiperi too. Thank you, Member Taiperi. Confirmation of minutes. I'd like to move the minutes from the 18th of March meeting be true and correct record. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Seconded by Councillor Mulholland. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. I have received no petitions. We now go straight to public input and we welcome to the table members from the Auckland War Memorial Museum. We have David Reeves, Megan McSweeney and Jignasha Patel. Welcome. Morena.
Very good. Well, thank you for this opportunity to present to you. We are grateful for the Council's continuing support of the Auckland War Memorial Museum. I understand that councillors have now received the full draft annual plan document. We were a little disappointed that the full document wasn't circulated earlier, but because it does in fact form the very important document that signals the intentions of the museum and forms a key part of the relationship between council and the museum, both from the point of view of costs, but importantly also the intended activities and the value and benefits that the museum provides to the Auckland community and in fact wider New Zealand. We have been encouraged by the relationship that has been improving between the councillors and the museum through the Rangatira Forum, and we're confident that that will continue to improve, and greater transparency and lock in a good process for the coming year's setting of the annual plan for subsequent years. We are confident that the museum's existing legislation has quite a bit of scope to make changes to that relationship and continue to provide a range of benefits for Aucklanders. And finally, my note of the offer we have made to councillors to come and visit the museum behind the scenes. A number of you have been for the visits, and we've certainly enjoyed being able to show you the breadth and depth of activity that goes on in the museum beyond the very obvious public-facing activities. And I reiterate our invitation to those of you who've not yet been able to come to make yourselves available, and we'd be happy to facilitate a tour for you. So thank you again, and I'd be happy to take any questions from councillors.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the museum, either on the full report that was emailed through last night? And I just want to apologise on behalf of staff for not sending that through earlier. Thank you. Your Worship?
Not a question, just a recommendation to my colleagues around the table. I had the chance last week, was it, to have a look at behind the scenes, and there are fantastic things there, and there are now guided tours for people that I think it's you pay for the cost of it, but to see all the things that are happening in the museum, what you see on display is the tip of the iceberg. What you see behind the scenes is really fascinating, including, I think, the fossilised remains of it. Was it an 8 million year old dinosaur? which is pretty incredible since I didn't know that there were dinosaurs ever in New Zealand. But this goes back to Gondwana land, and just to acknowledge the work that the museum does, and it's some of the latest displays on Auckland and the wraparound display screen are really world class. So congratulations on what you're doing there, much appreciated. And I'm sorry we're not in a better financial position to be able to, to do other than what we've had to do in terms of holding the funding. That's out of necessity, and it's what everybody faces. So don't feel singled out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and welcome. I was going through your full report this morning, and one of the things that sort of struck me was the visitation numbers you're projecting going forward. It's a substantial, almost threefold increase. What are you basing that around?
So that's our expectation, that seeing that without a year of lockdowns, so this is assuming that New Zealand continues to stabilise its COVID response. We have been very conservative with regard to overseas tourists. So that is the figures we have is based on appealing to Aucklanders. We have a very active program of international exhibitions coming. We've been able to secure a program out 2 or 3 years now. And through our market research shows that those are the kinds of things that Aucklanders are motivated to come and see, as well as the range of community-based projects where we continue to build that support. We have seen post-COVID lockdowns that Aucklanders are very keen to have somewhere safe and reassuring to come and gather. And in fact, just this week with the school holidays and the opening of the new Tamaki Herringa Waka galleries, it's really thriving. So we're feeling optimistic, and of course none of us can predict exactly how things are going to pan out in the next year or two, but those are our best estimates.
Great. I'm looking, hopefully, a realisation when it comes to reality. So it's great news. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. I'm just going to make a comment, and it's sort of on the building on what Mayor Goff said. I think for me, Councillor Henderson and I visited you last week, and just looking at that building and the complexity of it, and just the basic keeping the thing up and in good order and really working well is difficult. But I will go on the tack of this is much more than a regional museum. This is a national museum, and the scope of what you do. I mean, even the project you're doing, the places you're getting artefacts from, the inset, the whole everything, the natural history is from right across New Zealand. And so I think one of our jobs is really to be lobbying central government to support this, because there's so much important natural history and New Zealand history, Māori history and Pacific history in there that I don't think it's unrivaled. And I do think it's probably our duty to Aucklanders to lobby to get some support from government for this, because it's actually untenable for us to be able to keep it up ourselves. But also I hope that the projections do come true, because I see too that when it's free for Aucklanders, when they're in tough times, they want to go really good quality places that don't cost them much. It might just be a cup of coffee or a sandwich, and they can do that. But it's a place that's pretty accessible. It's fantastic. And the new, what I see about the new Te Waka Herringa gallery exhibition is that you can see yourself in it as an Aucklander. The statistics in that rival statistics New Zealand. I would rather go there to try and find something out about Auckland than try to use the New Zealand statistics site. It is impossible. So at a glance, it's all touchscreen. It's incredible. So thank you for the work you've done, because it's not easy. And I mean, we always want to kind of duck shove and let someone else have to do that, get the money. But I think, I've had a new awakening. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
Sure. Just got a question, and it's further to the matters that some other councillors have raised as it goes to your reporting. It's pretty clear, and was very clear from the tour that I had, that the Auckland Museum has got a whole range of activities that are vital, both Auckland but also nationally. There's the conservatorial role, obviously, as it goes to your collection and so on. But particularly as it goes to those things that relate to the national significance of the museum, is it possible in your reporting to identify that kind of value, which can be expressed in dollar terms, but could equally be expressed in other ways? And I think the other thing that was also relevant, and I don't have enough concept of it, is it's very clear that there's a very strong volunteer relationship with the museum, and it would be useful to quantify that. And this kind of metric relates both to the museum, but it also relates to the zoo and other entities, both within council and outside of council, that we engage with, that go to their reporting. And similar circumstances where there's both a regional value, but there's also a national value.
Certainly it's something that we have been doing some thinking about, and it's probably a useful topic to consider in the Rangatira Forum also, with regard to national value and where that conversation might go. In terms of quantifying it, it would probably be more in the nature of narrative rather than numeric measures. But it's certainly something that our teams are aware of all the time, because we know that the interactions we have with iwi right around the country, with inquiries, in fact, overseas and around New Zealand, daily we're aware of the connections and impact we have at a national level. So we can certainly put some work into thinking how we reflect that in a useful way.
Thank you. Councillor Hills.
Oh, no, Madam Chair, it's not a question again. But I think Councillor Coombe and I were two of the first to do the tour after it was delayed last year because of lockdown, and I'm so glad to hear that you're hosting everyone else if they want it, because I think it gave me a huge insight into what's going on. I guess my question is around the Tamaki Hiringa Waka exhibition, which is, I've only seen it when it was half done, sort of before it opened. What are the numbers like? Because I haven't seen you promote it as much as maybe I expected. And the other part is, are you on track to open the other new spaces where we were talking a couple of months ago?
Yes, we are on track to open the other spaces. They're under construction this week, and so in a few weeks' time they will be fully open. They are principally education spaces, but obviously opens at the weekend for families and children to enjoy as well. The promotion of Tamaki Hiringa Waka has been a carefully planned affair, because it's a long-term gallery with over 500 stories embedded in there. And so we're wanting to raise general awareness that there's something new to come and see. And we've got a program of activity to zero in on specific stories over, because we want to be able to refresh that promotion over a longer period of time. And it's a relatively complex set of stories, and so our marketing efforts are going from the generic to the specific and over an extended period. So yeah, that's certainly part of the program.
The exhibition is I just couldn't believe it actually, and how diverse what you've got in that space about Tamaki Makaurau is pretty phenomenal. The other thing I just want to thank you for, I extended I guess I pushed a group of young vision impaired and blind young people to come see you guys, because I thought it might be a cool thing to interact with and hear stories from the people who work at the museum, and they are raving about it and thanking me and thanking you all, and just said that the staff who spoke to them and worked with those young people were phenomenal. So thank you so much to your team.
Thank you. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for coming along today. I think Councillor Cooper made a really good point about that you're providing what we have in the museum as a national treasure, and we really need to be pushing government on the funding more. So thank you for making that point, Councillor. I just, in terms of the scheme of things, there's just one thing that jumped out of me in your report at page 47 about access to the museum, and this is where I have an interaction with the museum regularly because of being on the Domain Committee, and I'm really sorry that, you know, the access to the museum is getting really difficult because the Domain has been turned into Auckland's second biggest car park for commuters, and we know that school holidays come along and it's even more pressure, and that short-term parking is not there, and that the access links, and you know, it should be far more accessible. It's right by the city centre, but you can't even walk on a nice route from the city centre. So that's very much on my mind, and something that you know, with David has been really leading that need to improve accessibility to the museum. So I'm sure you're really feeling it with the school holidays right now, but absolutely, I know, Madam Chair, that's very much on all of our minds on the Domain Committee. So kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, just one final question from me then, and it's a financial one. I'm aware that the philanthropic community of Auckland have contributed quite significantly to the museum. What percentage of your revenue has come from that source, and how do you see that growing in the future, or how do you see that percentage changing year by year?
Sure. I think I'll hand over to my colleague Jignesha Patel, who's got her hands across the money. Sure.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. Philanthropic support is incredibly important to the museum. It is the role it plays is significant from a capital development perspective. In our operational revenues that that you see in the plans and all of that, we get a modest level. We have had some MB funding that came for the first time that spans 5 years from now. That's a significant project that's coming in, but it is very project related. So it has an associate, as you can appreciate, expenditure to deliver the project. The funding from a capital perspective ranges depending on the capital development program. We have had in the past in the realms of $3 to $4 million of funding coming through, but it is very specific to the development we are doing. We've enjoyed support in the heritage part of programs. For the recent transformation, we had support from the Lottery Commission on that, and minor pieces. So it is, general terms, probably about 20 to 30% would be a very high level, but it is very specific to galleries under development.
Thank you for that. Well, with no further questions, I'd just like to thank you again for coming to present to us. We all value who and what you do, who you are and what you do for Auckland. It's a magnificent facility, and we all appreciate the work that you do. Thank you very much.
We move it, we're going to get the name right for Jignesha Patel instead of James.
Oh, sorry, that was a... Can we just change that? Okay, so I will move a vote of thanks. Do I have a seconder, Your Worship? Yes. Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
So you're going to change that? Yeah, thank you. Right, move on to local board input. I don't believe we have any, do we? No? Right, extraordinary items. I've had no notification of extraordinary items for today. We move now to item 8, which is a C40 development, additional land disposal recommendation. There will be a bit of a revised recommendation, and that is as a result of legal picking up a bit of an issue, but I might leave Anthony, you to address that in your opening.
Yes, good morning. I think you covered it quite well, actually, Chair. Following discussions with AC Legal, we've just amended Resolution A, just in regarding the committee's delegations in accordance with the Reserves Act, 1977. So I take the report as read. It's quite a small report. Panuku are recommending the disposal of a small part of 331 Great North Road, Henderson, to allow it to be incorporated into the adjacent innovative low-carbon design in the former Alderman car park next door. The subject, 267 square metres of 331 Great North Road, is separated from the rest of the reserve due to elevation and a retaining wall. It is formed as driveway and car parking as part of the Waterman car park. It's been assessed by Council's community investment team in terms of open space values. As it's formed as car parking, a change of use and disposal will not result in the loss of open space amenity. I have with me John Carter, he's the Priority Location Director for Henderson. He's able to answer any specific questions regarding Unlock Henderson and the C40 development. Panuku has undertaken consultation with council, departments and CCOs, mana whenua and the Henderson Massey Local Board about the proposed disposal and incorporation into the C40 development. Feedback received from the wider council group has been supportive. As the site is located within the boundaries of Unlock Henderson, any sales proceeds will be invested back into the area as part of the wider Unlock Transform budget. Happy to take questions.
Right, thank you, Anthony. Before we go over for question, I'll ask for Councillor Henderson move and Councillor Cooper to second, just to have that on the table. But questions?
Just a quick question, Chair, and I'll reserve my right to speak. Where does the proceeds of sale go?
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. So the proceeds of sale go to the Transform and Unlock projects within Panuku, but we do have a specific project called the Oratia Link, which does relate to the reserve and improves the quality of that reserve.
All right, Councillor Coon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā koroa. I am very happy to support this and don't need to comment further, but just a small question with regards to the fact that this was a bequest, the land, part of it, and the old Auckland City Council didn't have a very happy history of how bequests were dealt with. Is there a process that we have as a council and a policy, and in terms of like contacting family members associated with it? Is it kind of like, do we keep a record of what the bequest was asking for, and is it consistent? Could you just explain a bit further?
Yes, through the chair. So the former owner, a lovely Eileen Newey, she did not have any successors. She bequeathed it to the former Borough Council. Auckland Council is the eventual successor to the Borough Council, so effectively we are the successors ourselves. So there's no issue there in terms of any obligations to offer back to former owners.
And there was no sort of terms of the bequest that would limit it in any way?
No, it was well known at the time that the former Borough Council was seeking to acquire the property for a public work purpose. I believe the former owner appealed against that, but bequeathed it to the former Borough Council at a death.
Thank you to her.
Yeah. Just through the chair again, her former house, which has been removed off the site, actually sits at Western Springs. Yeah.
Member Taiperi.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Kānui te mihi ki a kōrua. Just trying to work out the timing of in the Māori impact statement saying that information regarding the size and configuration of the parcel was part of the engagement undertaken with mana whenua. And then in the next paragraph it says if the subject parcel is approved, all mana whenua entities will be advised that council intends. So have you already advised them in the paragraph 24 or not?
Through the chair, no, we haven't advised them that it's been disposed of. We still need to go through the reserve revocation process.
But when you spoke to them, did you talk to them about that that's an intention to dispose of to the developer?
Yes, we did. Yes.
So this would just be a confirmation that that's occurred based on whatever's decided today?
Pretty much, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Kia ora, thanks for that. No further questions? I'll open for comments. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I think Councillor Henderson and I and the Henderson Massey Local Board would really appreciate your support on this. This has been part of the Unlock Henderson project and it's been going on for many years. And this site is a 450-metre walk to the train station. It's close to the motorway, it's got good cycling infrastructure, and it will provide much needed and quality homes right in the centre. And what Henderson really needs is people buying in the centre and committing to Henderson so that they will send their children to the local schools, which are all walkable. There's one literally, it's probably about 100 metres away, the primary school. The high school's probably, maybe 800 metres. And there's job opportunities. And this, for me, will help lift retail. It'll make our faith in Henderson as a metropolitan centre, it'll help some of it come to fruition, because this is what Henderson has really needed. It has needed people buying into Henderson and committing to Henderson, committing all their activities, their schooling, their everyday living, you know, so that it'll get a lift. You know, that's what it needs. But also the other lovely thing about it, it's right near Project Twin Streams. It's got park across the road, walk across the road, up around the corner to the library, across the road to West Wave. There's so many amenities here. And if it's going to be built to a high environmental standard as well, so we can look to this for sort of an exemplar for some of our Panuku assisted developments. So I just commend this to you.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I'm delighted, and I just want to thank staff for their hard work on this and throughout the Unlock Henderson program, doing a wonderful job. Look, I don't think, colleagues, that I need to work too hard to convince you today to support this, but I just want to speak briefly to let you know that you're doing another great thing for Henderson today, and there's been a few votes like this through the term. Just briefly, this is a key piece of Henderson's revitalisation, and this contributes to a re-emergence of the heartland of the West, which is Henderson. It prioritises housing and climate change, both of which are huge issues in Henderson and West Auckland, where the community have wanted progress for a very long time. You see, we're a bit different out west. We see housing in our town centres as our ticket to economic prosperity, and I get pressure to support more and more housing in town centres, and I think that's a great thing, and also for climate change compliant developments as well. And as you know, I take that pressure, and Councillor Cooper and I, as their representatives, push that pressure in for action as well around this table. So yeah, just to let you know, you're doing a great thing today, colleagues, and I'm delighted to support this.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, with no other people wanting to speak, I just want to let you all know that I absolutely support this as well, and I think the councillors have articulated really clearly why this is something that should go ahead. I want to thank Anthony Lewis and John Carter for their work on this project, and it's been moved and seconded, so I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. There we go. Happy Henderson. Right, item 9. Now we've got the annual plans for the council-funded entities. We have that for AREFA, MOTAT and the museum. And I welcome to the table Alistair Cameron. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. The report before you deals with all three of the annual levy processes that we have to deal with. I'll take the report as read, but just at a very high level, the levies you're being asked to approve, the War Memorial Museum, it's the same level of funding as was previously provided in the current financial year, which was the same as the year before. They've moderated their requests in light of the COVID budgets. MOTAT, the levy request is an increase on the current financial year's levy, but in response to the emergency budget, MOTAT actually reduced their levy by about $1 million last year, so they're still at a level of funding below where they were the previous financial year. And with the Auckland Regional Amenities funding, there is a modest increase there, largely to accommodate the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra, and they're moving to a new salary model with their players as opposed to a contract model. And that was something that's been discussed at length and in fact came out of a strategic review asked for by the funding board itself. In summary, all of the levies before you are in line with the legislation which allows them to ask for it, and we're recommending that the levies be approved. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Alistair. I'll move. We'll put it on the table. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Right, we'll go for questions. Sorry, Councillor Walker.
I've just got a question. In the agenda item as attachments, you've got excerpts of the annual reports, but not the whole report, or for that matter, a link. So in past years, I think we've often had the access to the whole report. Is there a reason for that? And if not, can we not see the the whole report?
You have previously seen the draft annual plans. A link with the full annual plans was circulated last night. There are hard copies over there. Why we haven't done it is simply space on the agenda. I think if we add all the annual plans, it's another 100 pages on your agenda. So we just put the sort of relevant financial excerpts on there. But all of that information has either been made available to you prior in draft form or has been circulated now.
Through you, Madam
And
Chair.
like I say, hard copies are available.
It did come through last night by email.
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. I mean, what I'm conscious of is our reporting is both reporting to us, but it's also reporting to the people of Auckland who may have an interest in, for example, the Auckland Museum or some other institution. And yes, I understand space, but can we not provide a link? Because I understand that many of these reports on the part of these institutions are available on their websites or the like, so that at least either a councillor or someone else can do some diligence and, further their inquiry. Is that possible?
We can provide a link if necessary, and I would add that MOTAT, the museum, and the funding board are required to publicly consult on their draft annual plan, so those members of the public that are interested can engage through those processes as well, but we can provide a link if that's what you want.
All right, and it will go up on their own websites too. Any further questions? Well, wonderful. Anyone would like to speak in support? Well, I'll speak in support. I would just like to, I'd like to thank both Ed and Alistair for their work. Look, this has been tough. They took a big hit in the emergency budget this financial year. And I, really want to congratulate, for example, MOTAT, who took a huge step back in the emergency budget in their ask, a huge step back. And they're just beginning to take a little baby step forward as we all look towards recovery, which is what we're, of course, doing in the LTP. And you remember that these go annual plan by annual plan. Museum, I think, absolutely deserve a round of thanks from us all for holding their levy at the same amount of money. And the regional amenities, look, it's really tough for them too, And we've just got to realise that they're only asking us, the RAF is only asking us for 41% of what they're allowed to ask us for. So it's significantly lower because they appreciate the financial constraints that Auckland is in. So I absolutely commend this to your vote. And I look as if I do have one more comment now. No? Yes, I did. Oh, well, you didn't put your hand up. Anyway, I know that you're all in support then. we can. Okay, we've got a question. I will let you speak. Yes.
So,
Madam Chair.
I'm happy to do that. David?
Just a question because I missed it went so fast. Alistair, how do you intend to progress paragraph 51 of the Māori impact statement? That's the governance, inclusion of more mana whenua in the governance side of things rather than just via the taumata.
Mayor, do you want to speak?
There is an ongoing discussion at a governance level between the board of the museum and some councillors. I think that can be one of the topics brought in there. The taumata is part of the legislation, so other than legislative change to formally incorporate that, would have to look for mechanisms within the legislative framework unless there was to be change. In regards to MOTAT, I think there's some sort of fairly active conversations about integration of MOTAT with Auckland Unlimited, and what could be explored there is sort of advisory governance boards or the like. So we have Māori advisory boards like the art gallery. It's how that these can be formalised more, and that's just ongoing discussion.
Yeah, just for you, Madam Chair, I mean, I understand the makeup and the taumata and that is an advisory capacity. I'm not sure whether they have a person that goes from there onto the board, but what I'm seeking, obviously, and I hope we all are, is more Māori in through the front door of the governance body rather than through some side door. Yeah, and that would be ditto for MOTAT. I'm not sure how far we can go with MOTAT, but I would encourage it. It's just as equal as I would with the museum and others.
And through the chair, I would just add that Auckland Council itself appoints directors to the boards of MOTAT and the War Memorial Museum, and there was an opportunity there.
Kia ora, thank you. I haven't closed the debate. I was just speaking as the mover. So, Your Worship.
Thank you very briefly, Madam Chair. What we're passing here is a substantial sum of money, $63 million, and that's an annual sum that we pay. And I doubt that our ratepayers actually even are aware of the fact that we're putting that sort of money into our Auckland War Memorial Museum, Museum of Transport and Technology, and the Arafa Trusts. I believe it's money well spent. These are critical amenities that we provide for our city, but it is a big sum of money. I want to acknowledge that all three agencies have cooperated thoroughly in terms of our emergency budget and the need to constrain their expenditure, and that does need to be acknowledged. They have cooperated fully with us. MOTAT gets a bit of an increase, but it took a substantial decrease last year. So, Michael, thank you, and Sue, for that. The museum, as I commented earlier, is at a static level, but has been is by far the biggest beneficiary of our spending in this area. I just wanted to comment very briefly on Arafa and to thank the board for its cooperation and Anita for the work that she's done on that. But 2/3 of the extra funding is to go to the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra. And I had the chance to talk to the orchestra just over a year ago, and the rate of pay we're paying to highly skilled musicians is minimal. It's not too far off minimum wage, and yet these are people that have incredible passion, incredible skill, and are likely to be raided from us because others can afford to pay them more. So I absolutely prove as an exception to the rule that we are putting a bit more money into the orchestra because one, it is absolutely justified, and two, the consequences of not doing so will be to put that orchestra into a situation where it's losing many of its critical players that makes it the special group that it is for the city. So I want to speak in support of what we've done and to thank all of the agencies for their cooperation through this really difficult time when each of those agencies has also suffered from loss of income because we've been locked down, because we've got no international visitors and so on. So thank officials too, finally, for coming up with something that I think is realistic and responsible in all the circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. And those musicians spend years and years and years of training getting to that point.
Yes, absolutely.
Councillor Walker.
Just want to speak in support, but also to emphasise the need in the reporting for the officers to generate some templates so that we have an increasing breakout between the regional, which is the Auckland Council aspect, and the national aspect, because quite obviously, as far as the Auckland Museum is concerned, there's a significant national role there. For the Auckland Philharmonia, I would suggest that that's also the case. Obviously, New Zealand Opera, and so on. And we need to have that oversight, and the government needs to see that, and the importance for us to have a level of reporting that indicates the variety of value that many of these entities give us, particularly in respect to the museum, that conservatorial role, the treasures that it holds, the cultural value and so on, which is absolutely immense. And as it stands now, that kind of reporting doesn't really come through, and in terms of our investment decisions, does not enable us adequately to weigh up competing investment requirements, both on our part and I would suggest the government's part, which is sorely needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cooper.
Probably what I was going to say was really in the lines of the Mayor. I mean, I think for all these organisations, it was such a hit last year and lower numbers, etc., loss of revenue. And so I do want to acknowledge them because a whole lot of other funding mechanisms dried up as well. And so it's been a really difficult time for all, and just, repeat what the Mayor said, really, to acknowledge everybody, because for all the governance boards, the management, it's really tough. And we're asking them to, be tougher. So that's an acknowledgement, and we just hope things get better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Team Auckland. Right, with no further speakers, and I'm just waiting now, no further speakers. It has been moved and seconded, so I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. We move now to item 10, which is our emergency budget monthly update, and I welcome to the table Nicola and Pramod and Ross? No. Thank you, our amenities. Go well. Continue what you're doing. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Through you, Madam Chair, as you've introduced, Nicola Mills and I will be presenting the emergency budget update for the period ending 31st of March 2021. The report this month contains the usual monthly financial dashboard, which provides an indication of how we're tracking against the emergency budget settings, and also a progress update on the savings target. And those were reflected in the recommendations in the previous slide. In terms of group performance to the end of March, the trends continue as per previous months, and overall the group is favourable against the direct revenue and direct expenditure settings, and below budget to date against the CapEx investment budget to date. The direct revenue trends continue with better than expected performance for both regulatory and water care revenue, being much higher than the emergency budget assumptions. One thing that has changed from the previous month, even though overall group direct expenditure is continuing to be favourable, we've seen that Auckland Council's indicators have improved from on track to favourable. And this is related to some projects being delayed, as well as some of the larger regional grants that will be deferred into the next financial year. Capital expenditure is also tracking below budget to date at about 87% of year-to-date budget. What we're finding is that in some areas of the group that we are experiencing issues to supply chain and other factors that are indicating that the full year budget may not be achieved. At this stage, the expectations are around 90% achievement, but this is just provisional results that we have at the moment. Next month, when the full quarterly report is presented, further details will be provided then. So even though we won't be meeting our asset recycling target this financial year, as I've updated in previous meetings, there's a timing delay in relation to when the cash received for the full 244 million target is achieved. Given the much better than expected revenue performance to date, as well as a slight slowdown in the capital expenditure, we're expecting that the year-end financial position will be better than that projected in the emergency budget. What this means is that it does provide an additional buffer against any future shocks, and as you know, we've still got an LTP to work through as well. The other thing to point out is that there still remains a high level of uncertainty with longer term revenue projections. So I'll hand over to Nicola now to talk through the savings update.
Thanks, Pramod.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm pleased to be able to report today that we have got to just over 119 million towards our $120 million savings target for the year. As Pramod mentioned, at the end of the third quarter, we had quite favourable results. We had a good review of our spending compared to the budget, and we're able to identify places where we don't require to spend that in the last quarter of the year. And this had allowed us to achieve just over 10 million of savings mentioned in the first point on the slide. We also, through being able to vacate some of the office premises, which was all planned throughout the WorkSmart program, but there's been some acceleration of that, and that's allowed us to be able to make some savings in corporate property costs. So, yep, that's the good news. Although I will acknowledge, of course, that it has required some sacrifice and a lot of hard work along the way as well to get to this point. Happy to take any questions.
Right, before we open for questions, I'll move the recommendations to have I lost my deputy. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mulholland. Questions? Councillor Dalton.
Thanks, Nicola and Pramod. It's been a really hard ask, that 120, and I'm just wondering, of that, how much, we've got 90 planned for the next 3 years, haven't we? Each year for the next 3 years, we're going to continue to save 90 of the 120. How much of the 120 were one-offs that will not realise that, let me think about this. Yes, how many of the 120 were one-offs?
Through the chair. So in terms of towards the 90 million, at the moment we have around 47 million that is contributing towards the 90.
Thank you. That's tough.
It is tough. It is. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora korua. I acknowledge as well the hard work and the sacrifice. This is really our only opportunity, I think, to ask just about the impact on staff and our capacity and resourcing around kind of critical areas. And I just feel that we need to kind of keep checking in that that the resourcing is, although we've got to make these cuts, we're still putting the resourcing in the right places. And one area that I've become concerned about is to hear that we've had a massive increase in noise complaints. So going from across the Auckland region, averaging about 1,000 complaints, we're now up to 1,400, which is just, a phenomenal increase. But at the same time, that team is experiencing cuts and restructuring and being put under a lot of pressure, which is going to have a whole lot of domino effects. So I just wonder if there's a way that we can and it's not fair to be looking at Pramod and Nicola about this, but I do feel that there needs to be a way in which we can have some visibility around what it means for our public-facing staff who are dealing with a huge, upturn in issues. And I know it's across a whole lot of areas, whether it's, particularly in regulatory
Councillor,
services.
it's not a financial question, so I'll answer. We have a workshop on it coming up, all right, that we will, just on noise, all right? So we'll be able to answer all your questions in that workshop.
I just raised noise as one area, but it's sort of like, how can we get some visibility just to be ensuring that the pressure isn't being put on staff in a way that's going to have a detrimental impact on them, but also mean we just can't respond to whether it's noise or other issues that might have changed. And I think, say, like with the noise one, the observation's been made that people are very anxious, there's heightened levels of stress, and that's contributing to more noise complaints where previously people might have tolerated noise from their neighbours. So it's might be just a one-off issue that we've had this big uptake. So I just would like to get some sense of how we're responding.
I know that workshop, as I said, is coming up, but also the staff numbers are reported in the quarterly updates as well. So maybe keep your questions for the quarterly updates. Staff hearing them now, they'll be able to cover that in a quarterly update. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks for the report. And I also commend you on your 119 out of 120. It's a pretty sterling effort in challenging times. Also note the 87% fulfilment of CapEx to date. Usually in the last 3 months or so, the last quarter, we actually get quite a big uptake in the capital. It's a bit of a frenzy, but it's a thing of climate and also projects coming to fruition. You're not expecting that to happen this time. You're saying 100% is unlikely to be met.
Through you, Chair. At this stage, the indications are that 100% will be difficult with the phasing through the emergency budget. Even though we do get an uplift in that final quarter, usually that's how the budgets were phased as well. There wasn't a straight line, so there usually is a higher budget to achieve in that final quarter as well. A lot of the issues are not in our control, which is impacting some of the slowdown, but 90% is still a pretty large number against the 2.7 billion CapEx budget.
I'd note, Madam Chair, I think 10 years ago we were struggling to get into the 70s.
Yeah, that's right. Councillor Stewart.
Yes, I was just picking up on what Councillor Coombs was saying about the noise control. I'm pleased that we're going to be following up on that, but I think we're going to find that now that we've got all this infill housing and all this intensification, we're going to have a lot more of this. So it is going to be something that we're going to have to really think about very hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and once again, congratulations to everyone working under these difficult conditions. I guess my question, and it is a staffing one, so it's just probably for the long term. I know that the pressure has been tough on staff, but also we're getting a lot of good staff leaving. Well, all staff are good, but we're getting a lot of staff leaving, not just being made redundant. So I'm concerned, at what point do we put the green light out that actually the pressure isn't there anymore? Because I have a worry that we're losing people because they're worried they might be up for redundancy. So at what point do we signal that actually this is a cooling phase and we're back on track, the emergency's over? Because I know there's a lot of fear out there of, is our department next, kind of thing. And I think that probably adds costs long term, because then we have to advertise for new jobs and train up people. That's the first question. And of the asset recycling, because that was predicated on the overall budget as a lever, where do you think that's going to sit? Could that affect staffing and capital works next year if we don't get on top of what we had in the budget?
Through the chair, Councillor Hills, thank you for those questions. Very difficult questions, actually. The first one, of course, around pressure being off. Well, as you heard, we've got 47 million of the 90 for next year that we've embedded on an ongoing basis. So there's still some work to do there. As we talk about savings, another way to reflect savings is cost reductions. Now that there hasn't been in every situation a case of just making savings and being able to achieve the same output. So it's a very difficult mix. It is a mix that really sits with the CEO, so I'm leaving that space for the quarterly reviews and those discussions that come through, because it's that mix of resources and wellbeing that have to be managed for all staff. So I don't have anything other than continue to ask those questions as part of those ongoing discussions. Yes, we're very proud as an organisation of where we've got to on meeting that dynamic, and we're well aware of the impacts that it has on staff as well. So it's a huge tension that you've identified and that Councillor Coombs has identified that we have to manage. So please keep on mentioning it. The second question was around asset recycling. We are confident around the timing of that asset recycling and the turn up of that within the next year. We have
a number of levers that obviously work in tandem, and this year we've had that buffer that's allowed the reasoned approach to asset recycling to work, so that we can optimise the value from that asset recycling over that slightly longer period. If that was to be delayed, then we'd have to look at some of the other aspects that turned up. Absolutely.
And thank you very much for that, Peter. The last question is just on the capital. If things start to improve again in the next couple of months, is there flexibility in the 10-year budget to bring any capital forward or anything like that? Because I know we keep talking about the rainy day, but in my opinion, at the moment it's pouring. I can't imagine a more rainier day than, you know, if we're looking back a couple of years, this is pretty significant weather. So I just wonder if how flexible, if we're tracking even better in a couple of months' time, that we can sneak some more capital into the mix and get, or do we have to keep revisiting it? Does the organisation have the flexibility to bring some projects forward if we are tracking better?
Through you, Chair, I think the key thing to note there is, based on the current mayoral proposal, there is a significant increase in the investment over the next 3 years in the capital program. So for some parts of the business or the group, you know, you're increasing investment over 100 million between this year and next year, which is a big jump already. So you're kind of going from a standing start to, you know, full throttle next year. So we're continuously looking at phasing the program, and timing changes do occur, but in terms of the overall investment that is still being worked through the long-term plan process, probably a different conversation, but there already is a significant increase factored in over the next 3 years.
Kia ora, thank you. And I definitely know that. I just know the gap of renewals and things is actually much larger than the increase that we're doing. But take that on board, and thank you for those answers.
Any more questions for staff before I ask them to move? Wonderful. Thank you very much for your work in the space. Now I'll open for comments. Do we have any comments, Your Worship?
Yeah, really to pick up Councillor Hill's point, in the mayoral proposal, we took extraordinary steps to bring forward $900 million worth of spending that most people probably originally didn't think would have been possible, and still get a prudential and balanced budget. I welcome the fact we will find the 120 million, and that's a message we've got to get out, because when I look at the consultation process, the number of people that came back and said, why don't you try making some internal savings? And, you know, here we are. I don't know what we used to save a year. It was 7. And now we've saved in the last year 120 million. And I don't want to pretend that that was easy. That came at the expense of salaries sometimes. Sometimes it came at the expense of jobs. Sometimes it was that we just brought forward the value for money savings that is an integral part of what our responsibilities are. If we do better than we imagine, there won't be any problem in spending the money, either on capital or OPEX. And I was talking to Councillor Sayers yesterday about, you know, road sealing and the hit that took. And obviously, if there's money that does come back to us that we weren't anticipating, we've got projects that we can move on. But I just want to remind everybody of the discussions we had during the emergency budget. I think Councillor Wayne Walker was the one that raised it, and I agreed 100% with it. The need to keep that freeboard there, because we still don't know what's around the corner. And, you know, we'll do better in revenue than what we're anticipating on current trends. But that will counterbalance the fact that there will be a delay in realising the value of the asset sales. And I don't want anybody to believe that, hey, we're through it all now, and the chequebook can come back out, we can freely write the cheques, we can spend a whole lot more money. We are absolutely not in that position. But what we are in a position, because of the competency of our finance team, and I want to thank them for that, Pramod and Nicola and Peter, we're in a position where we're getting the balance of our budget is in the right place. We are coming through this crisis. We have not had to do things that rip the guts out of our services. We have not slashed our capital programs. We're continuing to build that infrastructure. We haven't disrupted that process, but things are still incredibly tough. So I think, you know, pat yourself on the back with one hand and say, job well done, but look at the challenge that we've still got in front of us. And we must err on the side of caution, because if something does go badly wrong again, we're still not in a position where we can guarantee that there won't be level 3 lockdowns. That could happen, could be just around the corner, and we need to make sure that we have managed our budget in a way that we can deal with those as yet unplanned for and hopefully shocks that won't arrive, but you've got to be prepared for that. So big thank you to the team for what they've done, and congratulations to everybody around here that made those hard decisions. But please don't feel that we're at the point now where the constraints are off and we can throw the chequebook at it. We can't.
Thank you, Your Worship. How true. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I support item C. I support all of them, but particularly C, because I agree. We need to be very careful about how we go forward, and we need to have that headroom. And also, I remain concerned about the $90 million, right? We don't get a health and safety focus in this report. It's operational, you would say. Actually, it will fall to us. I have concerns about how much do we ask. 47 million so far towards 90 for next year, and it is really tough already. I have concerns. There are service level drops, you know, and we will deal with those, but I do worry about the pressure on the staff and finding those savings. They may come from other areas. I know the CEO is still doing the work on what we do as a council, and there may be savings in there. But just congratulations to the staff who I know are really doing all they can, and to get to 120 is incredible. If it was 7 in previous years, 120 in a COVID year, you know, there were a lot of savings to be had in some respects, although there were costs that we had to factor in as well. We had no income coming in, so that made a huge difference as well. But I just want to say that jury is out for me. I support the consultation on 90 million, absolutely. But some more information coming on how it really is going to impact going forward. And a little bit of that can be found in the Audit and Risk Committee papers, and I think that we need to keep a good eye on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sage. Comments. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Probably just a very quick comment around the round C and the importance of the asset recycling. Really just bring a focus on to our decision making around the downtown car park. I mean, that's going to be a significant contributor towards achieving that overall number.
Absolutely. Look, with no further comments, I just want to add my own. And one of the things we all struggle as councillors, and I think the Mayor as well, I'm sure the Mayor as well, is getting any good news out there. And what this report does is it highlights the amount of savings and efficiencies that we've done as a council in times of toughness to prove to Aucklanders that we can operate more efficiently and with less money. It's always hard for me to try and help you and everybody else understand how much is 119 million. You know, we deal in big numbers. So I've done some work around that, and it would be wonderful if everybody's social media profile helped me with this. But just to give you a bit of an idea, Albert Eden, this 119 million is more than all the residential rate take from your ward in rates. 190 million is more than the total rate take from Devonport Takapuna. 119 million is more than the total rate take from the Hibiscus and Bays. 190 million is more than the total rate take from Rodney. 119 more is more than the total rate take from Upper Harbour. It's more than the residential rate take from Waitemata. It is a huge amount of money. Well, I'm afraid it's not. I'm afraid that wonderful line cannot, Sharon and Paul and myself unfortunately can't give that. We exceed that 120 million, but everybody else can. Everybody else can say that. And I just think it helps you help tell the story to your communities how big that savings target has been. That's the good news. But the bad news is to only have achieved 60 million out of $250 million for asset recycling is really, really, really behind the 8 ball. So C is a very nice way of saying we're not out of the woodwork yet. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to add my thanks to the staff. This has been incredibly tough. This whole year we were up for nearly $500 million worth of lack of revenue, and we have done our bit. We have done our bit to find efficiencies and savings, and it's been very tough. So Peter, to you and all your team, Nicola, Pramod, Ross, huge thanks from us. We've got a quarter to go. This is only to the end of March, remember. So on that happy note, dare I say it, or cautious happy note, balanced note, I'll take this to the vote. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we move to item 11, the accommodation provider targeted rate suspension item, and I welcome to the table Andrew Duncan.
Good morning. This report's recommending that we continue our spending on visitor attraction and major events, but at a lower level than had been planned previously, and that we reinstate the accommodation provider targeted rate from the 1st of July 2022. We think this is the best trade-off between the value we get from investing in visitor attraction and major events, particularly in terms of the latent demand it generates, and from the events we can attract to the city in the future. Noting that the sector has indicated, given the position they're in, that this is not a priority for them right at present. And the current business position of accommodation providers that you can see in the data in this report, and that's been indicated by both them and the general public in the feedback. And of course, the remaining spending that we're proposing for next year is funded by general rates. And as you've been discussing, the general rate spending is constrained and has many other demands. So we think the recommendation to reduce the spending and reinstate the rate on the 1st of July 2022 is the appropriate trade-off to make in these circumstances. This recommendation supported, we've worked this up with Auckland Unlimited, and they support it. Because the decision last year didn't coincide with a rating year, the rate was due to start again on the 1st of April, and the invoices would be payable in the 4th quarter of this year. It's coming up to the time when those invoices will go out. So our recommendation to you today to implement a reinstatement on the 1st of July 2022 asks you to first agree that we remit the 4th quarter invoice for this year. And the second part of the recommendation is on the spending for next year and the rate for next year, which will be a recommendation to the governing body on the 25th of May, where they'll take the recommendation from this committee on this issue alongside the recommendations on the remainder of the LTP that will be made by this committee on the 25th of May. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, I remind you that we had a workshop on this for a reason, and everybody should have asked all the questions that they've had, but I will formally ask if there are any questions. No? Yes, Councillor?
So I've got a question as it goes to the suspension of the accommodation provided targeted rate. effectively, that decision is around still having the accommodation targeted rate, but pushing it out further. And given that we've had COVID over the intervening period when we first introduced this targeted rate, and we've got a quite different circumstance where we've got hotels, for example, that are being used for quarantine purposes and the like. They're not the standard accommodation that we would envisage for tourists. Is the present accommodation provider targeted rate fit for purpose in that respect? I mean, is it can it actually deal with the changed circumstance that we have now?
Yes, it can. So when we come back to you in November for the annual plan for 2022-23, when you'll have the opportunity to consider the accommodation and tourism business environment again in regard to the application of this rate for that year, we'll be able to advise you on exactly how we would manage those circumstances for hotels so that they're rated fairly, where they're providing MIQ services as well, if we're still unfortunate enough to think that we'll be in that position in 12 months' time. So we can definitely deal with that. We can deal with it now as well, but the rate's not going to apply under this recommendation.
A related question, and it goes to obviously the work between now and November. Will we also be informing ourselves around the progress around any form of bed tax or the like, so that it informs the later process?
Can I suggest we don't answer that question under
Yes,
the
Councillor.
basis of current court considerations?
Thank you. Right, no further questions. I'll open for comments. Any comments? Councillor Darby.
Thanks. Look, I understand the pressure here, and we've got to be careful because we do have the case live, but I guess what concerns me here, and I did articulate this in some questions in yesterday's workshop, is that we're actually stalling the exposure of Auckland here. A lot of New Zealanders would have greater visibility of a tourism option into Tasmania than they do have as opposed to a tourism option into Auckland at the moment. And when you're not in the market promoting your city because you don't have the budget, you do fall behind. So this motion actually is going to have us fall behind, unfortunately, and I think we need to be we need to realise that. We're out of the market. We're out of the market at the moment. We're not priming the market with who we are. We're not reminding the tourist market that we are a city worth visiting. We're relying on Tourism New Zealand, and of course, they're not giving us much focus. They're giving us that focus to the regions. We are not being well represented by Tourism New Zealand at the moment, and that is the blunt, honest truth of it. So without that, and without this, we are really well and truly in neutral. And this is going, when we do get this budget back, or something in place whereby we can promote Tāmaki Makaurau, we are going to be coming, our starting point is going to be a long way back in the field, of competitor cities who are trying to grab attention from the new tourism market that will emerge. But that is going to be quite a challenge. So I would imagine even if we do start collecting some kind of revenue next year, the product of that revenue is probably not going to show up for at least 6 to 12 months. So it's a long way out. There are some big risks in this, and I just hope that the tourism industry that has been lobbying hard for
such a collection regime to not be in place is aware of the risks to it by their advocacy.
Thank you, councillor. I should have called for a mover and a seconder for this. I've got a mover in Member Taipri and a seconder in the Deputy Chair. Thank you, councillor. Sorry. Thank you. Councillor, comment now from councillor Watson.
Thank you. I think it's perhaps worth noting that these recommendations are in fact what the accommodation providers asked for, and particularly the commercial accommodation providers in the long-term plan consultation. It's pretty much verbatim what they're requesting. The only thing that they added to that was that there'll be some sort of review of how this rate is operating as a whole. And I think it's important to understand where they're coming from, because basically their request is prompted by this desire to survive, and that's, you know, might sound a bit dramatic, but that's essentially the position they're in, particularly the kind of small accommodation provider that's out in the suburbs. Yesterday, I quoted a couple of figures that are reasonably representative, I think, of that small accommodation providers as a whole, where their revenue for the financial year is down more than 40%, as is their occupancy sitting around that 40% level too, and their room rates have dropped as well. So they're on a pretty grim sort of holding pattern, which in monetary terms, so to give you another example, you know, the break-even point for this one particular smallish provider is about $1,400 a day. During the lockdowns, they weren't making that for a 2-week period. So they're pretty stark numbers. The most effective thing we can do now is what we're doing is to suspend that rate, but also I think to signal, we've signalled it though it's not immediately apparent in the resolution, that there be some sort of review or analysis of how this rate is operated. And I should say in passing that these accommodation providers do appreciate the input of Auckland Unlimited, who have been supportive of them. So I think that's useful to put on the table, Madam Chair, that they appreciate the relationship that has developed with Auckland Unlimited and their empathy with their position. As far as our position goes, looking forward to July, or in advance of July it will be, we really do need to examine some of the key features of this rate, which haven't changed since it was introduced. And, you know, that goes to the basis of capital value. That doesn't even capture the number of people that are staying in any given hotel or motel. I think it also needs to go to the notion of benefit. So not only do they contest the idea that it's a fair representation of those who benefit, and it's just zeroing on them. Outside of that, geographically speaking, there's a very real issue of very little or no benefit coming to people outside of certain parts of Auckland. And while some were exempted, others weren't. So in many ways, it's flawed, and certainly listening to the people that are involved at the coalface, they say it's flawed. So if we do take this time between now and July to examine some of those issues, then I think that's going to be a productive use of time. And I would just say in concluding, Madam Chair, to talk about not saying anything while the court case is in progress. I have certainly no intention of doing that. But another nice effect of that might be a lessening or a removal of the very substantial legal bills that have been run up thus far with that court case. Apparently 1.2 million for the initial court case and an indeterminate amount for the appeal that's going on now. They are no small sums of money at the moment that are in essence arise out of those issues that I highlighted there. So I will heartily support these recommendations, as I'm sure everyone else would, and I think that'll be another good news stories to go to our accommodation providers in the interim. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors wishing to, sorry, Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak in favour of the motion, while acknowledging that the commercial accommodation sector has that relationship with Auckland Unlimited, which sounds like it's healthy and good. That's terrific. I probably don't see any perceived stalling because we're deferring this collection for the sector. They're big people, organised companies. They can promote themselves well enough, I think, without us having to come to the party. And I wish them well on that. We've also got to realise that the perception of Auckland, probably overseas, as a COVID centre in New Zealand. And if we want to bring tourists into New Zealand, they probably need to be being targeted at places where people feel least at risk. But I think we'll leave that up to the private sector to determine how they best promote themselves. So just speaking in support of the motion, Madam Chair, and I think it's the correct thing also to be aligning with the financial year in terms of the rating system. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And final comment? No, not final comment. Your Worship.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, I absolutely support the recommendation proposed here and note the support from officers from within Auckland Council and also from Auckland Unlimited. Over the last year has been a really black year for the whole of our tourist industry. We all understand the reasons for that. And, you know, I'm the first to say that when an industry is suffering the losses that our accommodation and tourist industry has, we're there to try to give them a helping hand, and we're doing that by suspending the accommodation provider targeted rate. I do want to say that the impact of COVID's not going to be with us forever. And if we look at it positively, actually, one of the impacts of COVID-19 and how New Zealand has handled it is that this country suddenly becomes more attractive to international tourists. We look like a stable country. People watched the America's Cup. They saw the sunshine. They saw the people gathering because we're not a COVID centre. We've got on top of it each time that it's there, and we've done better than almost any other place in the world. So that will help us. But I do acknowledge Councillor Darby's point that when international tourism resumes, if we're the only city in New Zealand and Australasia, and probably the wider international environment that's not promoting itself, then we might be struggling to get the people back. And I want to make not only that point, that we will need to go out and market ourselves at that point, but also to make the point that we're looking at promoting new events that will also be very expensive to the city. Everybody here would be in favour of the FIFA Women's World Cup, and the fact that we have the opening match and the semi-final opens up an audience to 1.2 billion people, 3 times the amount of the Rugby World Cup. But it's also costing our city, as it is every other city. So we'll be up for $11 million to run that, plus some of the operating costs around it. If we hold on to the defence of the America's Cup, we won't have the infrastructure to build because that's there, but we'll still have to do all that operational work around it. And each one of those events is incredibly good for the accommodation industry. So the FIFA Women's Cup will bring 130,000 bed nights to accommodation providers in Auckland, but we're paying for it. And one reason we brought in the accommodation provider targeted rate was because people around the city were telling me when the immediate and financial benefit comes to accommodation providers, why are we, the ratepayers, meeting 100% of promoting those events? And I agree with that. And I will oppose and oppose and oppose again any effort to put that whole weight back onto the ratepayer rather than asking the sector that does the best out of the tens of millions of dollars we spend on events and marketing. They've got to come to the party. They've got to make a share of that when they're in the position to do so. And if we don't do that, we know it's already built into our budget. There'd be a $126 million hole that we would have to meet by increasing rates or cutting other areas of council activity. I think that we do need to promote our city as a tourist place to come to, destination. We need to provide support for Auckland Unlimited, which I think the industry itself would acknowledge has done a really good job. And we need to promote events like the FIFA Cup that will be really good for our city. But what we're asking the industry to do when it's back on its feet is to play its part and to pay its share in that. But I support these recommendations in front of us. It's the best and most obvious way that we can help the industry when they're facing a tough time. When we get through that, we want them to play their part in helping us promote this city and running events.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Hard act to follow. Look, I am going to support these recommendations, but I did too want to acknowledge Auckland Unlimited and their constrained and continually constrained budgets. They'll be gearing up now to promote Auckland to the world, and they take a holistic approach. They take an Auckland Inc. approach. They don't just take an Auckland Council, these are our facilities approach. And they are doing that on a very limited budget, and we will be hearing from them in the future, and we have already to some degree around the challenges that they are facing around some of our assets as well as operational costs. So I have confidence in Auckland Unlimited, and I would have confidence in them to deliver what is required from this rate if and when it ever gets reinstated. So I just wanted to signal that perhaps we can have a really good think and look about the prioritisation of our budgets as we go forward through the LTP as to what support Auckland Unlimited need to succeed in their role of getting Auckland on the world stage once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, in conclusion, I'd just like to say that I also support the recommendations. I want to thank Auckland Unlimited, Steve Armitage and Andrew Duncan for their work around this. Look, this debate isn't about the pros and cons of the accommodation provider targeted rate. It's about the consultation that happened and which of the three options we're going to go for. And this is the best option for the accommodation sector in a time that they have found terribly difficult and with the lack of tourists coming to Auckland. So to that end, I'll keep it brief. It's been moved and seconded. Let's put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Item 12 is our usual summary of Finance and Performance Committee information, memoranda, briefings and our forward work programme. I will move this. Do I have a seconder? If so, thank you. Councillor Collins. Any questions? Comments? Put it to the vote. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. I have no extraordinary business. Now I will move a procedural motion to exclude the public because we are going into confidential. Do I have a seconder for that, Councillor Dalton? Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute break while we clear the room.